Hello YouTube! I wanted to make a video on how to study better for some time now. I know it's a bit strange seeing this come from a primarily nutrition and health-based channel, but I'm all about optimizing life, including the productivity side of things. Why? Because this is also a major source of life fulfillment, and keeping the holistic lens, career and financial success is often crucial, if not necessary, for setting ourselves up for success in other domains of life. So after spending 10 years too many in the post-secondary system, I feel like it's my turn to share what I've learned over the years. I went through a lot of trial and error and learned some lessons the hard way. So by watching this, I hope I'm able to save you from making the same mistakes. And this video should ultimately help you study better and achieve higher grades. While I will present a summary of everything shared towards the end, I think it'll be more fun and memorable to share my story a bit. So let's jog back to high school. In high school, I was predominantly a B student with some A's and many C's. That was largely out of not trying whatsoever. I'd rather play sports with friends or video games, so that's what I did. However, once I got to university, well, that's when things got real for me, and they got real for me very quickly. I realized it was now or never if I wanted to be successful. I never considered myself to be a smart kid, but I was determined to make a difference, and my mindset was, well, if I'm not smarter, I'm just gonna have to outwork you. So that's what I did, and it was paying off. At a local community college, I went from mostly B's to a mostly A's rather quickly. And while many would think that I had to make significant, devastating sacrifices, I honestly love school. I love studying with friends, I love doing well, and I know it's common for people to not like school, but it's hard to not like something when you're good at it. So besides studying more as in putting in more time, how do we get better at this? Well, once I got to UBC, a larger, more real university, it turns out that everyone was working hard. That was the default. The competition dramatically changed, and my first 2 semesters were less than stellar. After that, for once, I took the summer off school. I needed a break. The following September, back in school, I was determined to make change and improvement. I was ready to fight again. And I got my lucky break. I was taking a psych class that covered learning and memory. But right before we got to that chapter, I had a largely multiple choice midterm. If you've taken a psychology exam before, you'll be well aware how A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, D is A and B, E is B and C, and G is all the above. You get my drift. My indecisive booty narrowed it down to 2 options, and I physically marked which 2 options I was debating between. And right before handing the exam in, I went back and I changed a few. By few, I mean I changed all of them. So when I got my exam back, every single one of those ones that I changed, I was wrong on. I went from potentially getting, I think it was like 85, 86, to getting a low 70s on that exam. So it was very disappointing. In that learning and memory chapter, we learned how our subconscious brain deals with massive amounts of information before presenting it to the conscious side. This is how I know what I'm about to say in my next sentence. My subconscious has already come up with it. So lesson number 1 is to trust your gut feeling. I didn't know why I was selecting elephant instead of hippo, but it felt right. And the reason is because my subconscious had seen this while studying, and I couldn't recall it, but it knew. So trust that gut instinct. Now I'm going to break up studying into 3 rough categories. Here's how I view it. We have written assignments like essays, we have more skill type classes like math, statistics, chemistry, physics, and then the rest I would put into pure memorization camp. Of course, there's instances where that memorization gets applied, such as during short or long answer on an exam, but without knowing the fundamentals incredibly well, aka memorizing, you'll never be able to work on that integration piece. So let's talk about written work. Writing essays and written work overall was my toughest category. Naturally, I don't do well on the linguistic side of things. So what worked for me well was to ask others, mostly friends, who wrote like how I wanted to write. I asked for feedback on any assignments and essays, and their comments were the most important piece of feedback. One of my friends would often totally rip apart my work, making fun of it in the comments, and I honestly loved it. I loved it because I'd rather hear from him than my professor. Also, if you have someone do this, make sure that they track changes in your document and do not blindly just accept those changes. I know it's tempting, but you need to study them. Look at why and how these changes were recommended to improve the document. And then accept. If you don't have friends, or all your friends are terrible when it comes to writing, then rely on TAs, your prof, or hire a tutor to simply read and provide feedback. You're already paying a ton of money for school and that course. A few $100 to get feedback on your assignment or big essay before your prof gives you the final verdict is more than worth it. In full honesty, I'm not going to give you an easier road here. This will be more work for you, and that's the only way to improve. Taking shortcuts just shortcuts you to repeated failure. The second piece for written work is to consistently and constantly rewrite it. In practice, this was keyword was incredibly difficult. It takes a lot of brain power to come up with slightly better ways of saying the exact same thing. But over time, your writing substantially improves. I would start assignments and essays incredibly early to leverage this. But nowadays, you guys have ChatGPT and other AI programs to do the heavy lifting. I'm not sure what the rules are surrounding these tools, so use them at your own discretion. But if I was in your shoes, I would just simply ask AI to rewrite it sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph. And then, I know it's gonna sound crazy, rather than simply copying and pasting that, look at the different synonyms used, look at the sentence structure so you can learn how to frame your arguments and work in a better way. Then rewrite your work based on that. Remember, keep any arguments simple and to the point. Don't make things more complicated than they need to be. Moving on now to those formal sciences like math and statistics or chemistry and physics, where you receive near endless amount of different questions, all I can say is practice, 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 practice. Yes, we're talking about practice. I did make a mistake in my integral calculus class where I felt too stressed for time and I looked at the solution manual too early. Don't do this, it's not worth it. You're only robbing yourself of any future learning that's gonna happen. And believe me, it will show when it comes to exam time. You're probably picking up a little pattern here. You need to struggle. The exam will be a struggle, so you better struggle when you practice. You better figure out how to work through those problems before that exam time, or you stand no chance. Now, technically speaking, for these types of courses, there's usually types of problems. So add that once you master a type of problem, move on to the next one. On a time management piece, while it feels good and productive to study and get problems correctly, it's also a sign to move on. You need to start to master the type of questions that you hate doing. The questions that you most dread should be the ones you study the most, because other students are also dreading them. So by getting them down, you're gaining a competitive edge, leading to higher exam scores and marks. Now let's move on to the third type, the more pure memorization side. For me, this was mainly biology, this was psychology, anatomy, physiology, nutrition, but it could also be history, geography, or even math, computer science, or engineering at those first or second year levels. For these, the most important piece is recall, so I use Quizlet in write mode, basically flashcards. For example, I would take a slide my prof had, maybe one summarizing carbohydrate digestion, and on one side of Quizlet's card, I'll say summarize carbohydrate digestion. And then maybe I'll put like a 3 in parentheses, so I know I need to recall 3 pieces of information. Then later, when studying, when that card came up, in that write box, I would attempt to type out very roughly what those 3 were. Maybe like 1 starts in the mouth with saliva that has amylase. 2 still works in the stomach until acid breaks the amylase enzyme down. 3 continues on in the small intestine with pancreatic enzymes. And then I would click enter to reveal the answer. And I'll see if I missed anything or not. If I didn't miss anything, I would use that overwrite I was correct option. Now, sometimes there's diagrams like for anatomy or physiology where there's specific structures or reaction pathways to memorize. So for example, I would make a card to ask me, draw the heart and note the direction of blood flow. Then I would put lecture 3, slide 16. So then when it comes up, I can draw it if I can. But if I can't, I can click enter. Then I open that lecture up, go to the slide and compare my drawing to the prof's drawing or the textbook diagram. At this point, I will close my lecture and try to redraw it myself just based on short-term memory. You can repeat this process a few times for any complicated pieces, but often it's best to leave it until that card shows up next round. Usually for cards that have literal paragraphs information to recall or complicated drawings, I'm aiming for one more piece of information. Okay, say in our carbohydrate example, I forgot the names of, the pancreatic enzymes. So next time, I would just try to get these down. When you're forcing your brain to recall lots of information or very specific info, you're mimicking yourself taking an exam. And like an exam, don't just flip the card or go into your notes or your textbook. Sit there and stare at that screen. Struggle with it. I know I sound like a broken record, but seriously, sit there and think. Now, when you study like this, you'll find yourself wanting to stare into space, to look out a window. This is good. Let yourself do this. Don't fight it. Why? I noticed myself doing this for many years, and I couldn't quite figure out why I was doing it until I was listening to neuroscientist and mega nerd Huberman's podcast, that it became evident why I did this. In short, our brain is replaying the info in reverse. It's laying out the concrete when you take that brief mental break. When you feel tired and want to stare into space, this means your brain needs to reset its neurotransmitters, specifically norepinephrine. Huberman also shares the science on how this works, advises to stare at some horizon so your eyes can do this weird little bounce thing, which is the opposite of intense focus, and hence activates your parasympathetic, your rest and digest system, which lets you mentally take a break, lets you mentally recover for another bout of forced recall studying. Intuitively, I always prefer to study with a view rather than a room without any windows, so I could naturally take a mental pause. While Huberman recommends specific intervals based on the literature, I say not to listen to your body, but listen to your brain. The last piece I have on this, it can be very frustrating when you're doing Quizlet cards and you're not able to recall much. You start to feel like you know nothing, that you're going to fail and end up flipping Krabby Patties for a Greek crab in a town named after private parts. But after a few rounds, you're usually more prepared than you think you are. Hence, this is how I approach my semesters in my third, fourth, and post-undergrad years. During lectures, I would make Quizlets as the professor's teaching. Then I would polish them after class. For anyone familiar with the Cornell note-taking system, this is very similar. You're coming up with the potential questions on the fly and then copying and pasting the answers, aka the notes from your class, directly to them. After class, supplement these notes with anything you learned from the textbook. Then about a week before the exam, start your Quizlet rounds. Do these until 2 days before the exam. The goal is to get through a few rounds. For final exams, sometimes you may have 500 plus cards or more than 1,000. So you'll be able to get through 1 or 2 rounds, but that's okay. The day before the exam, do the practice exams and see how they go. Then review the learning objectives to make sure you didn't miss anything and to keep the info fresh. But don't do any forced recall if you don't have to. Anytime you recall that memory, you can alter it. And the night before the exam could be messing up concepts or just confusing yourself. Then simply just get a good night's sleep because this is when those memories cement themselves. If you search for study tips online, you'll likely come across spaced repetition or practice where the idea is to space your studying over days, weeks, and even months, rather than squeezing everything in right before the exam. By setting up flashcards, you've already begun the learning process. And while it's nice to space things out further, in my experience, a week or so before midterms was the ideal amount of time where there's enough stress in place to help you actually sit down and study, but there's also enough time to run through the material enough. Now let's get into more specifics here and what I believe to be one of, if not the biggest barrier to you doing well, which is the modern world and its simple pleasures, also known as TikTok, Instagram, and yes, even YouTube. That is, unless you're watching this video, of course, which is clearly an exception. Those forms of media present bite-sized content that hijacks your brain's dopamine and focus systems. When we're watching those pieces, especially the short-form versions, we're scrolling to satisfy our brain's search for what seems like important information, something to give us those feel-good chemicals or strike our curiosity. As you may one day need to, prevent your Kia from getting stolen, even though you don't drive in a Kia and you can't afford a car at all. Now, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details here, but to me, it's very obvious that school, what you're learning in school, can't compete with social media. The more you consume that media, the more boring school will be, and the shorter form media will take out your attention span. And soon you'll find yourself struggling to focus, yet you'll be able to focus on social media content for endless hours at a time without any struggle. It's often not an ADHD or a focus problem, but a content problem. Now, I know what you're thinking. Great, he's going to tell me to delete all these apps and not to use these. And no, I'm not going to do that. I need viewers. I need people to subscribe to my channel, which is a good reminder for you to hit that subscribe button. But in all seriousness, I think during exam times, those exams are worth way too much of your grade. And hence, you already invested time and money to blow off for some nano and reels on Instagram. So the best strategy here would be to delete and likely to delete these apps a week before your exam studying even starts. This way you can give your brain a bit of a dopamine reset. But there's another avenue we have as well. We're lucky that other people have come across this problem. So I doubt most people will look back on their lives and regret not spending more time on social media. But I also know that they maybe sometimes are only source of connection. So there's a better strategy. There's apps and softwares available that will actually let you outsmart yourself, meaning that you can set time limits. This is not like those built-in timers on the apps on your phone. Those just make you feel bad when you easily bypass them. Specifically for your mobile devices, check out Stay Focused or Lock Me Out. I've tried both of them and I use the latter. These let you limit your IG or TikTok or even websites like Reddit to X number of minutes. They also have options to allow 5 minutes every hour or even location settings. For example, at home, I keep certain apps blocked. And most importantly, they have a system in place to prevent easy uninstalls or tampering. I personally just use passwords that I don't know, but my brother and a close friend have for safekeeping. And I have way too much pride to ask them to help fuel my phone addiction. So if it works for you, then that's great. Now, it's my understanding that these apps are more readily available on Android versus iPhone, but I did see that Stay Focused is available on the Apple App Store. I put links to these in the video description below. The other option, which is what I did when I lived on campus before I knew about these apps, is I left my phone upstairs in my room. I would use it during my lunch break and before bed, but no more. Alternatively, you could also leave your phone in your car or just power it off. Okay, so that hopefully takes care of the phone piece. But as we know, our phones and social media are often connected to our computer as well. Here, again, we rely on blockers and different software that's available. My favorite is ColdTurkey because how difficult, no, impossible it is to get around it. ColdTurkey is similar to the phone apps. There's usage options, you can set a password and set different locks. I use the presets for news and shopping, for example. Sometimes I also need to block sites for more focused work, so I'll have temporary blocks that I'll just activate. But one of my favorite options is to activate the option with only unlocking that lock when I restart my computer. If you're like me, you likely don't restart your computer until you're done your assignment because everything's open. So this keeps you away from distractions until your assignment or task is done. These are just a few options and techniques to better set your environment up for you to be successful. Don't waste effort trying to willpower your way because that mental energy needs to be used for studying on and actually being productive. Often when I'm getting tired of working is when my brain will, by habit, try to open Instagram and be met by the lock. Moving on to the next quick tip I have for you today is to schedule. It's easy to get overwhelmed with lots of courses and assignments everywhere, which means that sometimes things slip between the cracks. Always plan ahead. When it came to exams, I always added buffer days to account for any study delays, which we all know happens. I'll add that you should use the simplest system you can, away from distractions or needing to use your phone. I use Google Calendar, Tasks, and Keep Notes. I also use Cal Newport's method of time blocking when I feel like my day is just way too scattered and just needs to be organized. Okay, last tip, unsurprisingly, will be to eat complex carbohydrates. Unrefined carbohydrate-rich foods that keep your energy level stable. Avoid super heavy and large meals since digestion can steal blood flow and can make you sleepy, lethargic, and definitely avoid fried foods for the same reason. You want to eat fried chicken before working out or running a marathon, at least I hope not. So give your brain the same respect it deserves for how much work it does every single day and fuel it right. Let's summarize what I just blabbered on about. Trust your gut instincts, especially if you've done any recall work like flashcards. For written assignments, seek feedback often and rewrite your work until you can't improve it any further. For those skill-based classes, practice lots and master the different types of problems. For memorization heavy courses, remember, recall and test yourself often. Once you've gotten the memorization piece down, only then can you integrate that knowledge for any short answer or essay questions or even multiple choice. When you're making your own flashcards or questions, make them as hard as you can. If they're harder than the exam, well, good news, you're gonna ace that exam. And last and arguably most importantly, remove distractions, schedule and time manage yourself. Stay on top of studying from the moment your semester starts or you risk falling behind. Take care of yourself, go for a walk with a pretty classmate, sleep lots, and eat well. If you do all that and still fail or fall short, well, I've been there. And that's just life. Life's not fair, school is not fair. You may get thrown all 4 exams in a row. You might get an easy midterm schedule or of like 1 exam per week, or your profs teamed up and put all 4 midterms on the Tuesday and Wednesday right after Thanksgiving. At the end of the day, all we can do is try our best and see what happens. This video is just me throwing out ideas out there to see if they gather interest. If you found this video helpful or you want to hear more about tips and tricks to be more productive or how to live a healthier and happier life, then I encourage you to follow me and hit the subscribe button. And then get off your phone. I know you got work to do. And I put a little summary of this video with the links of what I talked about in the description. And of course, there's no affiliations. I'm just sharing what's helped me out. That's all for this one. See you next time. This is Andy with Baines Nutrition. Oh, and a little bit aside, this is probably the only video I'll do in front of my degrees. I feel like I'm using my degrees to somehow justify how much of a genius I am when honestly, this was a freaking struggle. See ya.